Hey everyone, History Mystery Man here, wishing you all a very safe and happy holiday season ahead. You know, every November, specifically early November, my thoughts automatically turn toward the Edmund Fitzgerald, the ill-fated lake freighter that broke apart and sank in Lower Lake Superior on November 10th, 1975. And beyond the fact that I find the story absolutely fascinating, there are some really personal connections for me. I served as a merchant marine on the Great Lakes for a dozen years through the spring, summer, winter, and fall on a tug and barge unit. Just an incredible experience. I'm very proud of my service as a merchant marine and would not trade it for the world. So I have that. And then there were some personal connections for the Fitzgerald to my hometown of Toledo, Ohio. It probably spent more time in Toledo than anywhere on the Great Lakes. One of its regular runs, the Fitzgerald, was to carry steel taconite, these little round pellets of steel from the steel mills of upper Wisconsin and Minnesota across Lake Superior on down through the Great Lakes and its connecting tributaries to Toledo, Ohio. That was a regular run for the Fitz. It, of course, weathered in the wintertime in Toledo, so it spent a lot of time in my hometown, more than anywhere. In fact, it was there so much it became known as the Toledo Express, among other things. And of course, most importantly, the captain, Captain Ernest McSorley, lived in Toledo. His last known residence was here on Bancroft Street, just about a mile west of the University of Toledo. So he had some ties to my hometown as well. The story is so fascinating. You know, this was to be Captain McSorley's final run. After great service on the Great Lakes, served 30 years as a mate and eventually a captain. And all he had to do was make this one final run from Superior, Wisconsin to Zug Island in Detroit, Michigan, taking those steel taconite pellets along with him, 26,000 tons, in fact, that went down with him. One final run and he was going to retire. He just didn't get the opportunity. So I was fresh out of high school, 18 years young, when my stepfather at the time decided I needed to grow up a little bit, probably a lot of bit. Next thing I know, he was a Great Lakes tug captain, by the way, eventually a Great Lakes pilot, piloted foreign ships through the Great Lakes, but next thing I know, I'm on a 150-foot tug bouncing across Lake Michigan in the middle of January with a big giant oil barge in tow. I couldn't believe my luck, couldn't believe it was happening to me, but as I said, I'm really proud of the service and I'm really glad I did it for as long as I did. We worked spring, summer, winter, and fall. Most of the Great Lakes shipping stopped for the winter to lay up in their respective ports, but there were about 6 tugs that worked all winter. I was on one of them, the mighty James A. Hanna, 150-foot tug. It was an icebreaker, originally built for World War II, an icebreaker now, still today, and we'd push and tow oil barges all over the Great Lakes from one end to another. If we got stuck in the ice, we'd break off from the barge and break a path ahead in the ice, back it up, ram it, back it up, ram it, back it up, ram it. I can't believe I did it. And then we'd go back and get the barge and push it a little farther till we got stuck and repeat the same process. But it was a brutal job, specifically in the wintertime, and I know how rough it can get on the Great Lakes. I served on every one of them and worked on all the months, November, December. I've seen some bad seas. I've been scared out of my brains out there, but still yet today very glad I did it. I started out as a deckhand, as you might expect. I eventually did get my captain's license to be a tugboat captain, and I believe I'm still to this day the youngest tug captain in the history of the Great Lakes and its connecting tributaries. I got my license in Piney Point, Maryland, when I had just passed my 21st birthday, and then became a tug captain and worked as a merchant marine in that capacity. Getting on in 1978 as I did for the first time, I had no idea that just 3 years prior, this big giant iron ore, the Edmund Fitzgerald, sank just 3 years prior. The Fitzgerald was at the time the largest lake freighter on the Great Lakes at 730 feet. It had a load of iron ore on it, these little round steel taconite pellets, 26,000 tons of iron ore it loaded up in Superior, Wisconsin, and left Superior, Wisconsin about 2 p.m. November 9th. They knew there was some storm reports in the area. The major storm, if it even got to a gale, should have passed below Lake Superior. It did not. The Edmund Fitzgerald set off at 2:15 p.m. from Superior, and as the day wore on, they were on a trajectory right across the middle of Lake Superior. But as the day wore on, the seas and the winds and the gale forces got worse and worse and worse, and they had to change course and go up to the north and hug the Ontario, Canada shore to get some protection from the beach. They weren't alone out there. There were other lake freighters out there. The one other lake freighter out there in tandem with them was the Arthur M. Anderson. Captain Bernie Cooper, the captain on the Anderson. They were kind of watching out for one another as they passed through this storm, but it just kept getting worse and worse. And through the night, it turned into a gale. And then there were storm warnings out. Winds sustained at 60 miles per hour. Seas as high as 35 feet. Now, I've been in some heavy seas on the Great Lakes, and they are nasty. It's not like the ocean where you got the big giant roll because you got all that ocean to work with. On the Great Lakes, you're defined by protective, borders, tight borders. It's not a big ocean. In the seas, they build and they bite and they snap and they literally pound you to death out there. And the Edmund Fitzgerald, fully loaded, 730 feet, was indeed taking a pounding. It was about 17 miles ahead of the Arthur M. Anderson at one time, but it got too far ahead and wanted the Anderson to catch up. So the Fitz backed off a little bit because they wanted to sort of keep an eye on one another. As the storm got worse, many people believe the Fitzgerald went aground in a place called Caribou Island. There are some shoals, some shallow shoals up there. And by that time, the Fitzgerald had lost both its radars. There were 2 cover hatches on the ship that actually blew off, had a fence rail that came down, because that ship was just tweaking and bending and twisting. It's so eerie on those ships. The Fitzgerald was not riveted together, which would have let it bend and shift a little better. It was weld plated together, and there were known stress fractures in the ship. It was due for service. It didn't get it, but it was all welded together. And if you're on one of those ships, that you can see them. They twist and they bend and they creak and they moan and they groan. It's very, very eerie, and that's what they're experiencing. And as they began to take on water, many people believe they went aground at Caribou Island, tore a hole in the bottom, taking on water there, and they knew they had hatch covers that were off on top, so they could have been taking water from the bottom and from the top. And I can just only imagine what that experience was like, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And the Captain McSorley from the Fitz and Captain Bernie Cooper from the Arthur Anderson were talking back and forth, and some of the last known recordings of Captain McSorley were that he had reported that there were hatch covers that had blown off. The ship was starting to list, leaning to the left. He knew he was taking on water. You add the 25 and 35 foot seas, 26,000 tons of steel taconite sloshing around back and forth, and you've got some serious issues. In fact, the last known transmission from Captain McSorley was about 7 o'clock to Captain Bernie Cooper on the Anderson. Captain McSorley of the Fitz said, "We're taking on water, but we're holding our own," were the last words heard from Captain McSorley. Then at about 7:10 p.m., the lights just went out of sight. It was gone. There are several theories as to why it went down. Keep in mind, the Fitzgerald, largest lake freighter at the time, was 730 feet long. It sank in lower Lake Superior in water with a depth of about 530 feet. By the way, the Edmund Fitzgerald did not have a depth finder on it, a thermometer that can tell you how close to the bottom it is. They actually had to do it the old-fashioned way with a weight and a line. So it sank in shallower water, 530 feet, than the actual length of the ship at 730 feet. Now, there are a couple theories as to why and how it went down. A lot of people believe it just took on so much water and the seas were just too much, and eventually, as it began to take on water, it lost buoyancy, as you might expect, and just nosedived down into Lake Superior, and then just hit the bottom bow first and then broke apart. I don't think that's what happened. I think it broke apart in half in two on the surface. I mean, if you look at it take the sonar and look at it on the bottom of Lake Superior, it's the bow, the front section, is laying right side up, and about 250 feet away, nearly a football field away, is the stern section, the back end laying completely upside down, and then in between is debris and taconite and such. And so I believe it just, too much stress, too much twisting, too much water taking on among the steel taconite there, and I think it just broke apart and sank. I mean, literally split in two and went down. If it would have hit the bottom first, you know, the sections would be closer together, but they're a football field away, which leads me to believe that it sank, broke apart first and then went down, and it went down fast. That's the other thing. There were no SOS, no distress calls coming from Captain McSorley. Nothing came transmission-wise, meaning that it went down very fast. There were never any bodies found, the 29 men on board, meaning that they're still on the ship. So they went down with the Fitz, literally. And it's so sad because they were literally 15 miles from Whitefish Bay, which would have been a protective harbor where they could have anchored out and waited it out. Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? The searchers all say they'd have made Whitefish Bay if they'd put 15 more miles behind her. Oh, that ballad by Gordon Lightfoot, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Every time I hear it, the hairs on my head literally stand up. They were so close, 15 miles from safety. They had come so far. Ernie McSorley was going to retire after this one final run, and he just didn't get the chance. So I wanted to sort of, you know, this is my salute to you, the crew on the Edmund Fitzgerald, Captain Ernest McSorley, the 29 men who went down. Sort of a Veterans Day salute, because I always considered Merchant Marine as part of the veteran force. So here's to you, Captain McSorley, among the 29 men, the brave men who went down on the Edmund Fitzgerald, November 10th, 1975. A happy Veterans Day salute to all the veterans in our military service and the crew on the Edmund Fitzgerald. Thinking about you coming up on this Veterans Day. Captains and crew, may you rest in peace.